A lone rancher adopted a poor Apache girl. She turned out to be a fugitive widow's daughter. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sun had not yet climbed over the northern Arizona ridge when William Harlow stepped out of his cabin, pulling his coat tight against the morning cold. The ranch sat in a lonely stretch of land, bordered by sparse pines and long shadows that never fully left the valley. The air carried a dry bite, the kind that drew lines across a man's face after enough winters spent alone. William had lived this isolated life for nearly 7 years, ever since his younger brother drowned during a river crossing on a cattle drive. The guilt had stuck to him, shaping every choice he made afterward. He left town work, bought this small parcel, and tried to settle into a routine that didn't require speaking to anyone unless absolutely necessary. His days were simple: care for the horse, keep the land in order, cut enough wood to outlast the long season. He rarely expected change, and he certainly never prepared for visitors. As he crossed the yard toward the woodpile, something fell off. A faint shift in the air, a stillness that wasn't part of the usual silence. He paused, scanning the porch. The boards near the far corner looked slightly raised, as if something underneath had pressed them from below. He approached slowly, boots cracking the thin frost layer. When he crouched and lifted the hanging edge of the board, his breath tightened. A child lay curled in the narrow space, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hair was tangled with dirt and dried leaves, her face pale beneath streaks of dust, and her breathing came in shallow, irregular pulls. Her hands gripped a broken beaded necklace, the colors dull but recognizable as Apache work. She stared up at him without blinking, her eyes full of exhaustion and confusion. She didn't try to crawl away, and she didn't speak. William recognized the look. Fear held so long that it had become habit. He hesitated only a moment before reaching under the porch and sliding his arms around her. Her body was rigid at first, then weakened when she realized she lacked the strength to resist. Inside the cabin, he lowered her onto the rug near the stove. The room held only the basics: a table with uneven legs, a single cot, a small shelf of tools, and a stove stained from years of use. The girl watched every movement, her gaze tracking his hands as if expecting harm. William noticed the cuts along her arms, the dirt embedded in her clothing, and the cracked skin around her mouth. She hadn't eaten properly in days. He set a pot of broth on the stove and knelt beside her, checking for injuries. She flinched when he touched her wrist, so he pulled back and waited. After a moment, she extended the broken necklace toward him as if showing her single possession explained everything. He studied the beads, familiar patterns he had seen traded at outposts, usually crafted by women of a nearby Apache band. The broken string suggested she had been grabbed roughly. The broth warmed enough for drinking, so he poured a small cup and placed it near her. She lifted it with both hands, gulping carefully without spilling a drop. As she drank, she kept her eyes fixed on him, trying to judge his intentions. When she finally lowered the cup, her voice came out in a strained whisper. "Asha." William nodded once. William. The name didn't seem to mean much to her, but she committed it to memory. He recognized the moment she decided he wasn't a threat. Her shoulders eased, though only slightly. As he added more wood to the stove, Asha tried to sit upright, but wavered. He steadied her with one hand on her back. Her small body shook with fatigue, but she didn't pull away this time. She scanned the cabin again, taking in the nails on the shelf, the bucket by the door, the single coat hanging on a peg. Her eyes paused on the empty cot, then shifted to William's tools laid out neatly beside it. He wondered where she had come from, how far she had walked, whether someone was looking for her. He also knew that asking too many questions now would only push her further into silence. Asha's breathing slowed as warmth reached her chilled muscles. Her eyelids lowered, then flicked open again when a noise outside scraped against the window. William turned his head toward the sound, hand tightening near the rifle leaning beside the wall. The noise faded, just wind shifting debris across the yard, but Asha's reaction told him enough. She had been running from something real. He returned to her side and draped a folded blanket around her shoulders. She clutched the necklace again, unwilling to let go even as sleep pulled her down. As she settled, William leaned against the table and exhaled through his nose. He hadn't expected responsibility to walk into his life, let alone crawl under his porch, but he couldn't turn the girl away. Not in this condition. Not in this land. His mind ran through the next steps. He needed to gather more wood, check the perimeter for tracks, and prepare food she could keep down. He also needed to decide whether to ride to town and risk attention or remain hidden and protect whoever the girl was fleeing from. Asha shifted in her sleep, tightening her grip on the beaded string. William watched her for a long moment. She was the first living soul to step inside his cabin in months, and her arrival left him uneasy, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that unsettled the solitude he had built for himself. The sky outside lightened slowly. The stove crackled with steady heat. And inside the small cabin, the life he had known, quiet, predictable, empty, shifted without warning. He stood there, knowing everything had already begun to change. The next morning arrived with a gray, flat light that settled over the valley like cold dust. William stepped outside before Asha woke, wanting to check the yard while the sun was still low. The air carried a stillness he didn't trust. He scanned the ground out of habit, expecting the usual tracks left by his horse or the prints he made the night before. Nothing more. But something new caught his attention. Near the woods, faint impressions cut through the frozen dirt. The shape was narrow, the stride uneven, and the angle suggested someone had moved quickly while trying to stay low. These weren't print from a child, and they weren't old. The frost had formed around them imperfectly, which meant they had been made only hours earlier. William knelt beside the tracks, studying the depth and direction. Whoever had passed through had not approached the cabin directly, but they'd come close enough to watch it. That fact tightened the muscles in his shoulders. He didn't like being observed without knowing by whom or why. He rose and returned to the porch, keeping his steps slow so he wouldn't startle the girl inside. When he opened the door, Asha sat upright on the rug, blanket wrapped around her like armor. She held the broken beads in her lap, twisting them between her fingers. The moment he entered, she straightened her posture and watched him carefully, trying to interpret the look on his face. "Tracks," he said, keeping his tone steady. She blinked, then lowered her gaze to the floor. Her breathing changed, faster, tight, but she remained quiet. William recognized the shift immediately. She knew someone had come near. The realization confirmed what he suspected. Whoever she had escaped from was still looking. He set a bowl of warm oats in front of her. She paused, then began eating in small, controlled bites, stopping every few moments to look toward the door. The tension in the room grew more visible with each glance. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and pulled the blanket closer. William sat at the table and began checking his tools. He sharpened a small blade, inspected the hatchet handle for cracks, and tightened the screws of the lantern cap. His movements were calm and deliberate, not because he felt relaxed, but because he needed Asha to see steadiness in him. Panic wouldn't help either of them. After a few minutes, Asha rose from the rug and walked toward him with hesitant steps. She stopped at the side of his chair and placed the necklace on the table. The beads rolled slightly, forming a crooked line. She tapped one bead, then pointed to the window. William understood. She wasn't only showing him where she came from. She was telling him someone dangerous owned those beads once, and that she feared the person might be near. He turned the necklace over in his hand. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. He'd seen similar patterns worn by Apache women and children during past trading seasons. The broken string suggested it had been pulled from her abruptly. That told him more than Asha could say aloud. He slid the necklace back toward her. "It stays with you." She hesitated before taking it again. Her fingers trembled slightly as she looped it around her wrist since the string was too damaged to wear properly. Once it was secured, she stepped away, but not far. She lingered near the table, close enough to watch what he did next. William checked the windows for any sign of movement along the ridge. Nothing stirred. Even the trees seemed still. The quiet felt unnatural, as if the land were waiting for something. He lowered the rifle from its wall hook, inspected the chamber, and set it beside the door. Asha followed the motion with wide eyes. He saw fear there, but also trust, something new, something fragile. She wasn't afraid of him holding the rifle. She was afraid of who he might need to use it against. To settle her nerves, he moved to the stove and added another log. The soft crackle filled the silence, easing the room's tension. Asha sat back on the rug, keeping her knees pulled to her chest. Hours passed slowly. William repaired the torn hem of her dress with a needle and thread he hadn't used in months. Asha watched every stitch, following the needle's path as if the simple act grounded her. When he handed the dress back, she touched the repaired seams with surprised relief. For the first time since she arrived, her expression softened. Later, she wandered through the cabin, examining items she hadn't noticed the night before. An old horseshoe nailed above the table, a chipped mug with a cracked handle, a folded map tucked between books. She touched nothing but studied everything. William realized she was trying to learn the space quickly, mapping exits, corners, hiding spots. It was the behavior of someone who didn't expect safety to last. As afternoon light slipped through the window, Asha sat near the door, hugging the blanket around her shoulders. She looked at William with quiet urgency. "Someone coming?" she whispered. He crouched in front of her. "Not yet." She didn't look reassured, but she accepted his answer. For now. The day ended with a sense of unease hanging over the cabin, but the girl was alive, fed, and warming. William checked the yard one last time before nightfall and secured the latch firmly. He stood in the doorway, looking out over the darkening land. Asha remained behind him, sitting upright on the rug, eyes fixed on his back as if his presence alone kept danger away. Whatever had driven her under his porch hadn't given up. The tracks proved that much. William stepped back inside, set the rifle within reach, and closed the door with a final, solid click. Tomorrow would bring choices he had not planned on making. But he knew this much already. He would not let anyone take her. The next morning brought a thin layer of ice across the bucket by the door, a quiet reminder of how quickly winter swallowed this part of the territory. William stepped outside before the sky had finished turning blue, wanting to check the ridge again in case more tracks appeared during the night. He scanned the line where the tree shadows stretched across the field. Nothing new had disturbed the frost, but the memory of yesterday's prints weighed on him heavily. He tugged his coat tighter and followed the fence toward the east side of the property, each step measured. The cold bit at his fingertips, even through gloves. Out here, signs of movement stood out, broken twigs, crushed grass, misplaced stones, and he watched for all of them. The land remained still. As he headed back toward the cabin, he saw Asha standing in the doorway. She held the blanket around her shoulders, her hair hanging in uneven strands that caught the wind. She wasn't trembling this time, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, waiting to hear whether danger lingered. "No tracks today," William said as he approached. She nodded once, but her expression didn't ease. She stepped aside so he could enter, then closed the door quickly as though afraid something outside might slip in behind him. Inside, he prepared a small breakfast. Asha sat at the table, watching him assemble the food. She seemed slightly less guarded than the day before. Her hands rested on the table instead of clutching the blanket. When he set her portion down, she ate with more certainty, as if she no longer expected the meal to be taken away. After they finished, William moved to the window to check the ridge again. He froze. A lone figure was walking along the far edge of his land. The person moved slowly, shoulders bent forward, favoring the left leg. The gait was uneven, not in a threatening way, but in a way that screamed exhaustion. Asha followed his gaze and stiffened instantly. She stepped back, almost colliding with the table, and gripped the necklace wrapped around her wrist. William glanced at her. "You know who that is?" Asha shook her head, not in denial, but in fear. The figure stopped briefly, looking down at the ground as if searching for her footing. Then she straightened and continued forward, her pace unsteady but determined. As she came closer, William saw more details. A torn deerskin dress, hair tangled at the ends, and a posture that suggested she had not slept in days. Her skin looked wind-burned, and she held her arm against her ribs as though nursing an injury. Asha whispered something too soft to catch. William opened the door and stepped outside, keeping one hand near his belt-out habit, but not raising his weapon. The woman slowed when she saw him. Her breathing came in sharp, controlled bursts, like someone who had forced herself to keep walking despite the pain. She stopped in the yard, keeping a several-yard distance. Her eyes flicked past William toward the cabin. The moment she spotted Asha standing behind him, her face crumpled with shock. "Asha," she breathed, barely forming the name. The girl ran toward her without hesitation. The woman dropped to her knees, arms opening in a desperate motion that came from pure instinct. Asha collided with her, clinging tightly. The woman wrapped her arms around the girl, holding her with a grip that looked almost painful, as if afraid the child might vanish if she loosened her hold even slightly. William watched the reunion from a careful distance. Relief filled the woman's posture, but fear still lingered beneath it. She kept glancing around the yard, checking the tree line, checking the ridge. When she finally lifted her gaze to William, she tried to stand but struggled. Her voice came out strained. "I did not come to bring you trouble." William stayed still, not wanting to crowd her. "Who are you?" "Nami," she answered. She steadied herself, though her legs wavered. "I am her mother." Asha buried her face in her mother's dress, the relief visible in every breath she took. Nami continued, each sentence slow, as if choosing her words carefully. "My people believe I caused my husband's death during a raid. They blamed me. They chased us. My daughter ran ahead. I thought she was gone." William studied the torn fabric along Nami's shoulder, the bruises forming beneath the skin, the way her lip had cracked from cold and dehydration. She wasn't lying. She was barely standing. "You being here puts you in danger," she said with a quiet urgency. "Men will come. They came after me all night." William looked at Asha, then back at Nami. Every instinct told him the situation would pull him into something he had no reason to involve himself in. He had spent years avoiding other people's conflicts. But the girl had crawled under his porch half frozen, and now her mother stood in front of him, barely holding herself upright. "Come inside," he said. Nami hesitated, glancing toward the ridge again. Then she nodded, guiding Asha forward with a protective arm around her. Inside the cabin, Nami's eyes darted around, assessing every detail. The single cot, the tools, the latch, the window. She wasn't judging his home. She was calculating safety, blind spots, escape routes. William recognized the behavior. He had seen the same alertness in soldiers who returned from long fights. He stepped away so she wouldn't feel crowded. Asha stayed pressed against her side, refusing to let go. Nami spoke again, her voice low. "If you let us rest here today, we will leave tonight. I do not want your life at risk." William looked at the girl's thin frame, then at the exhaustion carved into Nami's face, and made his choice. "You're staying," he said. "Both of you." Nami stared at him, caught off guard. For the first time since she arrived, her expression softened, not fully trusting, but something close to believing she might have a chance to breathe. William turned toward the wood stove, adding more logs. Behind him, the sound of Nami settling onto the rug with her daughter reached his ears, their quiet breaths filling the space that had been empty for so long. For the first time in years, William felt the cabin holding more than silence. Something new had entered, fragile, frightened, uncertain, but undeniably alive. And he knew their presence would change everything. The cabin felt smaller the moment Nami stepped inside with Asha pressed against her hip. William had built the place for one man with simple needs: a cot, a stove, a rough table, a shelf for tools, and little else. Now every corner of the room carried a new weight. Asha's thin breaths, Nami's guarded posture, and the strain of unspoken questions filled the quiet in a way William hadn't felt in years. Nami sat slowly near the stove, lowering herself with caution as though expecting the floor to shift beneath her. Asha clung to her hand, refusing to release her grip even for a second. When Nami brushed hair from her daughter's face, Her fingers shook with a mix of exhaustion and relief. William noticed the small tremor and pretended not to. He set a tin cup of warm water before her. She didn't drink immediately. Instead, she smelled it, then gave it to Asha first. Asha sipped cautiously, watching William over the rim of the cup. "What happened to your leg?" William asked, keeping his tone steady. Nami rolled her ankle slightly, wincing. "A rock slide. I slipped when we crossed the ridge. I have walked too long on it." The swelling was obvious through the torn hide wrapping her calf. William gestured toward her foot. "I can look at that." She stiffened. Her hand moved protectively in front of Asha, but after a moment of study, she nodded once. Permission was given, but only barely. William knelt beside her. He lifted the edge of the wrapping with slow, clear movements so she could see each action as it happened. The skin underneath was bruised badly, darkened along the side, and swollen from overuse. He pressed gently to check the bone. Nami clenched her jaw, but did not pull away. "No break," he said. "You need rest, nothing else." "Rest is dangerous," she replied under her breath. They might be near. Asha's grip tightened around her mother's arm at the mention of pursuers. William's expression hardened for a moment, then softened again. "You're safe here for now." Nami looked at him, assessing whether she could trust that statement. Her breathing slowed slightly, which told him she wanted to believe him even if she wasn't sure yet. He wrapped her ankle more securely with a clean strip of cloth. As he did, Nami studied his hands, steady, careful, deliberate. She seemed surprised by the patience in his movements. When he finished, she whispered something in Apache to Asha, and the girl nodded, pressing her cheek against her mother's shoulder. William stood and moved to the window. Snow drifted lightly across the yard, rolling in thin waves as the wind changed. No signs of movement near the tree line, no returning footprints, no smoke trails from unexpected fires. The land looked empty. Too empty. Behind him, Nami spoke again, her voice a little stronger now that warmth had returned to her body. "You asked nothing about us." He didn't turn around. "You'll tell me when you're ready." A silence followed, a different kind than before. Not fear, not tension, something like a small, careful relief. Asha wandered toward the shelf where William kept his tools. She didn't touch them, only examined them closely. The hammer, the worn rope, the old horseshoe. When she spotted the folded map tucked between two books, she reached out to it but stopped short, waiting to see if he would object. William stepped closer, pulled the map from the shelf, and opened it across the table. Asha climbed onto the bench and watched him trace the lines of creeks and canyons. Nami watched from the stove, concern fading just enough for curiosity to take its place. "This is your land?" she asked. "The part here," William answered, tapping a small section. "The rest belongs to no one. Or everyone. Depends who you ask." Nami's gaze moved across the drawn shapes until she found the area she recognized. Her eyes tightened. "We came through this canyon. They followed us for 2 days. I lost them near the ridge, but I don't know how far behind they are now." William studied her expression. She wasn't exaggerating. She was exhausted, in pain, and dangerously close to collapse. The fact that she managed to reach his cabin at all meant she had pushed far beyond what most could endure. "You should sleep," William said. Asha's head snapped toward him, worried he meant to separate them. He shook his head gently. "Both of you." Nami hesitated, then moved closer to the rug near the stove. She lowered herself onto it with slow care. Asha curled beside her, tucking the blanket around them both. William placed another log on the fire, making sure the warmth would last. As their breathing settled into the slow rhythm of people surrendering to exhaustion, William sat in his chair and watched the flames reflect off their faces. Asha's grip on the necklace loosened slightly. Nami's shoulders finally dropped from their tense position. For a brief moment, the cabin felt balanced. 3 people sharing the same small space not by accident, but by a fragile, growing choice. And as William looked at the 2 figures asleep beside his stove, he realized something he hadn't expected. He didn't want them to leave. By the next morning, the cabin no longer carried the same emptiness it had held for years. The fire still burned from the log William placed before dawn, casting a steady light over Nami and Asha as they slept curled together on the rug. William stood near the door, fastening the last button of his shirt, trying to adjust to a world that now had more than one set of footsteps in it. He stepped outside to check the perimeter before either of them woke. The ground held no new tracks. The frost remained evenly spread across the soil, unbroken except by his own boot prints. The stillness should have eased him, but instead it sharpened his nerves. Silence meant either safety or hidden danger, nothing in between. When he re-entered the cabin, Asha stirred first. She lifted her head slowly, blinking as if trying to remember where she was. Once she recognized the rough walls and the stove, her posture softened. Nami woke a moment later, her hand instinctively moving to her daughter's back. William nodded toward the basin on the table. Water's warm. Nami rose carefully, testing her injured leg. The pain was still there, but the swelling had reduced slightly thanks to the wrap he applied. She lifted Asha, guiding her toward the basin. Asha washed her face with quick, controlled movements, watching William from the corner of her eye. This time, the look held less fear and more curiosity. William prepared breakfast, simple toasted bread and a small portion of stewed apples he had stored away. He placed the plates on the table and stepped back, giving them room. Nami guided Asha into the seat, then sat across from her. She waited a moment before eating, studying the food as though unfamiliar with receiving anything freely given. As they ate, William repaired a cracked piece of firewood rack near the stove. Nami watched him while pretending to adjust Asha's dress. Every time he moved, her eyes followed for a moment, measuring whether he meant any harm. But when she realized he wasn't paying attention to her, she allowed herself to relax, even if only slightly. After breakfast, Asha wandered toward the horse trough outside. William joined her, maintaining a careful distance at first. She hesitated, then extended her hand to stroke the horse's neck. The animal lowered its head, accepting her touch. Asha leaned closer, her tense expression easing into something close to relief. "She likes animals," Nami said from the doorway. Her voice was steadier today, less strained. Her father taught her to ride. William didn't respond immediately. He watched Asha run her fingers along the horse's mane, noting how her shoulders dropped, how her breathing calmed. She wasn't the same frightened child he found under the porch. She was waking up again, piece by piece. Inside, Nami tidied the cabin without being asked. She folded blankets that had never been folded neatly before. She wiped the table clean, removing stains William had stopped noticing years ago. She mended the tear in the curtain near the window. Her movements were quiet, careful, and efficient. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was reclaiming order in a life that had been chaos for too long. William entered the cabin and paused when he saw her repairing a loose hinge on the cupboard. She glanced at him, unsure whether she had overstepped. He shook his head. It needed fixing. A soft breath escaped her, a small release of tension. Later that afternoon, Asha approached William with a hesitant gesture. She pointed to the stack of wood near the stove, then tapped her own chest, offering to help. William handed her a small log. She carried it with both arms, wobbling slightly but refusing assistance. When she placed it neatly beside the stove, she gave a small nod of accomplishment. "She wants to be useful," Nami said quietly, watching her daughter with a mix of pride and sadness. "She thinks work keeps her from being taken away." William looked at the girl again, understanding more than Nami realized. He had lived under the same belief after losing his brother. Work kept thoughts from swallowing him whole. As evening approached, the cabin changed once again. Nami cooked a stew from ingredients William had nearly forgotten in his pantry. The smell filled the room, warm and grounding. Asha sat near the doorway, humming softly as she cleaned the dirt from her repaired dress. William caught himself watching them longer than intended. For years, he had lived as though the cabin existed to house his solitude. Now it seemed to have a different purpose, one he hadn't been seeking but couldn't ignore. After dinner, Asha crawled onto the rug beside the stove, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Nami lowered herself beside her, placing a protective hand over her daughter's back. Asha fell asleep quickly. Her grip on the beads relaxed rather than desperate. Nami looked across the room at William. Her eyes held gratitude, though she didn't voice it. She didn't need to. William settled into his chair, the fire reflecting in his eyes as he observed the quiet scene before him. He didn't know what would come next or when danger might arrive, but for the moment, the cabin no longer felt like the hollow refuge he had built after losing his brother. It felt like the beginning of something he hadn't expected, a life shared, even if only for now. And that alone made him sit a little straighter, listening to the soft breaths of the two people who had brought warmth back into his silent home. The sixth morning arrived with a sharp wind, carrying thin snowflakes that never fully touched the ground. William stepped out early, wanted to check the fence line before the light strengthened. He carried a small toolkit at his side and kept the rifle slung across his back. Ever since Nami arrived, caution had become routine rather than preference. He closed the cabin door quietly so he wouldn't wake Asha. Nami had been sleeping lightly, rising at every sound throughout the night. William knew she hadn't reached true rest since coming here. Her fear might have calmed, but it hadn't vanished. As he walked toward the north fence, he noticed something wrong. A post had shifted, not from weather but from force. A boot had pressed into the dirt beside it, creating a shallow print angled inward. Someone had stood there recently, watching the cabin. He crouched, tracing the outline with his glove. The track was larger than Nami's pursuers from 2 nights prior. Someone heavier, moving with purpose rather than pursuit. The print pointed toward a cluster of trees near the ridge. Whoever was there had watched from a distance, long enough to lean against the post. William's breath tightened. This was no mistake. Someone had come close, then left without announcing themselves. When he straightened, he caught movement near the cabin. Asha stood at the doorframe, blanket around her shoulders, hair pulled back loosely. She hadn't made a sound approaching. She pointed at the disturbed fence, then looked at him with a worried expression that needed no explanation. "Yes," he said quietly. Someone came. She stepped closer, keeping her gaze on the ground as if searching for more prints. Her brows drew together, concern clear but controlled. She tugged lightly on his sleeve, asking silently what they should do. William placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Inside," he said. They returned to the cabin. Nami stood near the stove, hands pressed against the table for support as she watched them enter. Her eyes darted from William to Asha, reading every gesture for clues. William set his tools down. Someone was near the fence. Nami's breath hitched. How close? Close enough to study the house. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself before facing him again. "I thought we gained distance." "You did," William replied. "But this may not be the same man. This person moved differently." Asha moved to her mother's side, gripping her dress. Nami rested a hand on her daughter's hair, grounding them both. William checked the rifle again, cleaned the barrel with a cloth, and loaded 2 fresh rounds. Every movement was quiet but deliberate. When he finally looked up, Nami's gaze held both fear and apology. "Your life did not need this," she said softly. "It's here now," he answered. Nami lowered herself into a chair, adjusting her injured leg carefully. William saw how she winced when bending it. Her condition still needed rest. He stepped closer with the intention of adjusting the wrap, but she lifted her hand slightly, asking for a moment. He waited until she nodded. He unwrapped the cloth gently, revealing faded discoloration and reduced swelling. Her skin was warmer today, less strained. As he rewrapped it, she watched him closely, not with suspicion, but with a searching look, as though trying to understand why a man like him would involve himself in the troubles of a stranger. "You could have sent us away," she said. "I didn't. Why?" William paused before tying the final knot. He didn't fully know the answer himself. "Because she was under my porch in the cold," he said simply. "And you came back for her." Nami absorbed the words silently. She exhaled, long and slow. Asha tugged on William's sleeve again, pointing at the window. She traced a small figure in the air with her finger, then pointed to the trees. The message was clear. She worried whoever had been near the fence might return. William approached the window and surveyed the ridge. No movement, no smoke, no shadows cutting across the snow. The quiet felt unnatural again, as if the land was holding its breath. He turned back to Nami. You and Asha stay close to the stove today. I'll work around the cabin. I won't go far. You mean to confront whoever is watching? Nami asked. I mean to be ready. Throughout the day, William remained within sight of the cabin. He repaired the fence post with careful precision, replacing the foundation stones and packing the dirt tightly. He cut more wood, stacking it neatly near the wall so the stove wouldn't go cold. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the trees. Inside, Asha stayed near the window. She followed his movements with anxious eyes, her small hands pressed against the glass. Occasionally, she opened the door to bring him tools he didn't ask for, a hammer, extra nails, rope, eager to help in any way she could. Nami managed light chores despite her injury. She swept the floor, cleaned the basin, and prepared a small batch of bread using ingredients William rarely touched. She worked silently, but with growing assurance, the rhythm of daily tasks calming her nerves. By late afternoon, the wind picked up, brushing loose snow against the cabin walls. William stood on the porch, scanning the treeline one last time before dusk settled. Still nothing. But he didn't believe the watcher was gone. We finally stepped inside. Asha wrapped her arms around him without warning, a tight, sudden hug that startled him. She held on for a few seconds, then stepped back quickly as if embarrassed by her own boldness. William didn't comment, but the small gesture settled something heavy inside him. Nami observed the exchange, her expression softening. She trusts you, she said quietly. William removed his gloves, hanging them on the peg. Both of you stay here. Whatever comes, you won't face it alone. Nami swallowed hard. You should not take on our danger. It's already in my fence, he said. Night fell with a heavy stillness. William positioned his rifle near the wall, checked the shutters, and secured the latch. Asha curled up beside Nami, who held her close, eyes open in the dim firelight. William remained awake long after they slept, listening for the faintest sound beyond the walls. A man living alone learned to recognize normal noises. Wind through branches, snow shifting on the roof, the creak of old wood. Tonight felt different. Someone, somewhere near the ridge, had not finished their business, and William intended to meet them before they reached his door. Dawn arrived, quietly, the kind of muted light that softened everything without warming anything. William barely slept. He kept his boots on and sat in the chair beside the door through most of the night, rising every hour to check the window. The land remained still, but the stillness felt guarded, as if something out there waited for the right moment. Inside the cabin, Nami slept lightly with Asha curled against her. The girl's breath steadied only when her mother's arm remained around her waist. Every time Nami shifted, Asha tightened her hold, as though letting go would pull her back into the darkness she came from. William watched them for a moment, struck by how natural their closeness looked. By mid-morning, the wind began to carry faint creaks from the distant pines. William stepped outside with a bundle of firewood, scanning the ridge. He didn't see movement at first, but then shapes broke through the trees. 3 riders, slow and cautious, approaching from the northeast. He stopped walking. The bundle slipped from his arms and dropped into the snow without a sound. The riders steadied their horses and scanned the land as if deciding who lived here and whether he deserved a visit. William's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening, a reaction he'd cultivated through years of hard living. Trouble was easier to face when your pulse didn't betray you. He turned and entered the cabin. Nami, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. You both stay in the back corner. Keep low. Asha ran to her mother immediately. Nami rose, moving carefully on her injured leg, and guided her daughter behind the stove. Their fear was immediate, sharp, and silent. Asha pressed against her mother's chest, eyes wide but dry. Are they the same men? William asked. Nami peered through the small crack between the stove and wall. Not the ones who chased us 2 nights ago, she whispered. Different. I do not know them. Different meant unpredictable. Unpredictable meant dangerous. William lifted the rifle from its place and checked the chamber again. He wasn't eager for a fight, but he refused to let anyone cross his land with bad intentions. When he opened the door once more, the riders had already reached the edge of the yard. The leader was a tall man with a thin frame and a narrow face. His horse looked overworked and irritated, shifting under him. The man surveyed the cabin with a practiced eye, the kind of gaze that searched for weaknesses. "Morning," the leader called out, though his tone lacked politeness. "You the owner of this place?" "I am," William answered, keeping his posture relaxed. "We're looking for someone," the man said, adjusting his reins. "Apache woman, traveling with a child. They were seen crossing this valley 2 days back." William didn't move. "Haven't seen anyone." The leader's lip twitched slightly. "Strange. Tracks lead toward your land. There's plenty of game out here. Could be anything." Another rider leaned forward. He had a scar along his cheekbone, pale against sun-weathered skin. "Funny thing, that trail dies right up near your porch." William met the scarred man's eyes without expression. "My animals sleep near the porch. They circle the place all the time. Tracks get messy. Hard to tell one from another." The leader's jaw tightened. "We'd like to take a look around." William stepped forward just enough to make his intention clear. "No." The silence that followed pressed against the air. Even the wind stopped moving. "You're refusing a search?" the leader asked. "I don't open my home to armed strangers," William replied calmly. "You have no cause to enter." The second rider's hand drifted toward his holster, not fully drawing but testing William's reaction. William lifted his rifle a fraction, enough to show readiness without escalating. Asha's small gasp sounded from inside, just barely audible. William hoped they hadn't heard. The leader leaned slightly forward in the saddle. "You want to help yourself? You let us check. Could save you trouble later." "You brought the trouble," William said. "Not me." The man held his stare for several seconds. The other riders shifted uneasily, their horses sensing the tension. The leader finally made a decision. He clicked his tongue, turning his horse slightly. "We'll be back," he said. "Tracks don't lie." "They don't," William agreed, "which is why you should follow them somewhere else." The leader didn't respond. He jerked his reins, and the three horses pivoted sharply. They rode off toward the far ridge, leaving a trail of disturbed snow behind them. William didn't lower his rifle until their silhouettes disappeared into the trees. Inside, Nami released a breath she had been holding since the men arrived. Asha crawled into her lap, trembling softly. "Who were they?" Asha whispered against her mother's shoulder. Nami didn't answer immediately. She stroked her daughter's hair slowly, eyes fixed on the door. "Men who take what they want," she said finally. William closed the door and leaned against it, rubbing the tension from his forehead. He knew the riders weren't finished. Men like that didn't accept uncertainty. They came back when curiosity turned into frustration. Nami looked at William with a mixture of gratitude and worry. "You risked yourself. They wouldn't have left if I didn't stand firm. They will return." "I know." The fire crackled softly as Nami held Asha tighter. William checked the window again, committing the direction the riders had gone to memory. He didn't like enemies he couldn't see. For the first time since they arrived, Nami's voice carried something beyond fear, something closer to trust. "You protected us," she said. William didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth hung plainly in the air between them. And from that moment forward, none of them would face danger alone. The hours after the riders left passed slowly, each minute heavy with expectation. William spent most of the afternoon repairing the latch on the door and reinforcing the shutters. His movements were steady, but his mind stayed fixed on the ridge where the men had vanished. They hadn't accepted his refusal. He could feel it in their posture, in the way the leader looked at the cabin before turning his horse. They would return, perhaps at night, perhaps at dawn, but they would come. Inside, Nami tried to keep Asha occupied with small tasks. She had the girl sort the beads from the broken necklace, laying them out on a repaired scrap of cloth. Asha worked quietly, placing each bead in a careful row, as if the order gave her control over something in a world she couldn't influence. Every so often she glanced at the window, checking whether William was still outside. Nami limped as she moved around the cabin. Her injured leg stiffened during the coldest hours, forcing her to pause frequently. But she pushed herself, cooking, cleaning, straightening the shelves, not from obligation, but because acting helped her steady her thoughts. She had always kept her hands busy when fear threatened to overwhelm her. Today was no exception. When William finally stepped back inside, Nami looked up sharply. "Did you see anything?" "Nothing yet," he answered. He set his tools on the table and removed his gloves. They're deciding what to do next. Asha climbed down from the chair and approached him cautiously. She didn't speak, but she placed a single bead in his hand, pressing it into his palm with deliberate intent. It wasn't a gift. It was a request to stay alert. "I'm watching," he said softly. Her shoulders loosened just a little. The afternoon dimmed into evening. The fire cast long shadows across the floor, stretching toward the corners of the room where warm light rarely reached. William pulled a chair near the door and sat with the rifle resting against his knee. He wasn't tense, but he wasn't relaxed either. His breathing stayed measured, and his eyes flicked to the window whenever a branch snapped in the wind. Nami joined him after putting Asha to sleep. The girl curled beneath a blanket near the stove, her small hand wrapped around the necklace as though it anchored her to safety. Nami watched her for a moment, then shifted her attention to William. "They will not let this go," she said quietly. "I know. They were searching for someone else once," she added, lowering herself into the chair across from him. "A woman from our band. They accused her of hiding food during a drought. When she denied it, they hunted her for weeks. It is the same men. You recognize them?" "No," she admitted, "but I recognize the way they move. They do not stop until they get what they want." William rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This land isn't theirs to search. That does not matter to men like that." He studied her face. The faint marks of exhaustion, the shadows beneath her eyes, the stubborn determination holding her upright. "You want to leave tonight?" Nami looked toward the window, thinking, "Running with my leg as it is would slow us. They would track us easily. We cannot outrun horses." "Then you're staying?" Her jaw tightened. "I did not want to bring your death. Protecting my home is my responsibility," he said, not running from it. Nami absorbed that. For the first time since she arrived, her expression showed something deeper than fear, relief mixed with respect. "You carry burdens that are not yours," she whispered. "I choose the ones I carry." She fell silent, staring into the fire. William could almost see the thoughts unfolding behind her eyes. Every possibility she imagined, every outcome she feared. After a while, she spoke again, softer now. "Before all this, my life was simple. I gathered herbs. I taught Asha to track small animals. My husband hunted. We lived quietly. I never imagined standing in a stranger's home, running from my own people." William leaned back in his chair. "I never imagined sharing this cabin again." Nami's gaze lingered on him. "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. "Not once." Her breath caught slightly. She looked away as though she needed a moment to steady herself. The firelight reflected off her features, tired, worn, but still holding strength beneath the surface. Outside, a distant crack echoed through the stillness. Not a branch, not the wind, something heavier. William stood immediately. Nami stiffened. "They are close." "Maybe," he murmured. He lifted the rifle and moved to the window. The ridge was dark, shadows blending among the trees. Nothing moved, but he sensed presence, something just beyond sight. Watching, waiting. He turned back to Nami. "If they come tonight, they come for answers, not conversation." "Then what do we do?" "We hold our ground." She straightened her posture despite her injury. "Then I will stand with you." "You stay with Asha," he said firmly. "Your safety is the only thing that keeps her safe." Nami wanted to argue, but she accepted the truth. Her hand brushed his arm briefly in acknowledgement before she went to kneel beside her daughter. Asha opened her eyes, sensing tension. She pressed her face into her mother's chest without crying. Nami rubbed her back slowly, whispering quiet reassurance in their language. William positioned himself near the door again. The fire crackled softly, the only steady sound in the cabin. Night deepened. The threat outside tightened. And for the first time since his brother died, William didn't feel alone in the fight ahead. He felt responsible for them, for this small, fragile world inside his walls, and he knew he would defend it with everything he had. Night settled into a heavy stillness, the kind that swallowed every faint noise until even the wind seemed to pause. William stayed near the door with a rifle resting along his thigh, listening for anything that didn't belong. The cabin walls creaked softly as the fire burned low. Behind him, Nami kept Asha close, their breathing steady but tight with expectation. Hours passed. Nothing moved outside. Then, just as the fire's glow dimmed, a single crack split the silence, a footstep pressing into frozen ground. William straightened immediately. Another step followed, heavier, closer. Someone was approaching the yard with no attempt to hide their presence. William signaled Nami with a small tilt of his head. She pulled Asha against her chest and shifted further behind the stove, shielding the girl's body with her own. William didn't speak. He opened the door just enough to slip outside, closing it behind him so the heat wouldn't escape. The cold hit instantly. 3 silhouettes stood at the edge of the yard, the same men from the ridge. The leader stepped forward, holding his reins loosely in one hand. "We're here for the truth," he said. His voice was calmer than earlier, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't softened. "You gave us an answer we didn't like. This land isn't yours," William said, keeping his tone level. "You've got no right to come here at night." "We have every right to track what's ours," the leader replied. "The woman and child belong to the band that wants them back. They're not property. They're fugitives. The woman caused her husband's death. She'll face justice." William didn't look away. "Not here she won't." The second rider shifted in the shadows. "We can take the child if the mother won't come." At those words, something inside William snapped into clarity. The fear Nami carried, the nightmares Asha had endured, everything led to this moment. "No one leaves with you," William said. The leader's expression hardened. "You ready to die for people you barely know?" William didn't blink. "If I have to." The cold air held their breath between them. The men hadn't expected resistance strong enough to risk bloodshed. They exchanged a quick look, reevaluating. The leader raised his chin. "This is your final chance." William lifted the rifle, not aiming, but holding it with unmistakable intent. "You had your chance when I asked you to leave." A tense silence followed. Then the leader exhaled sharply. "We're not spilling blood today, but the chief will hear of this. If he wants the woman punished, he'll come himself. Tell him she's not on his land anymore." The leader hesitated, realizing William meant every word. Finally, he jerked the reins, turning his horse sharply. The others followed. Their hooves cracked through the icy soil as they rode off, leaving a trail of frozen dust behind them. William stayed still until their silhouettes disappeared completely. Only then did he lower the rifle and release a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He stepped back into the cabin. Nami stood as soon as the door closed. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. Asha clung to her dress, eyes wide with worry. "They're gone," William said. "For now." Nami asked. "For good," he answered. "They won't return. The chief won't send men to die on a stranger's land after hearing what happened. Too much risk, no gain." Nami took a slow step toward him. "You protected us with your life." William shook his head. "I protected my home. You're part of it now." Asha walked forward, hesitant at first, then with more confidence. She placed both her hands on William's coat and leaned into him. It was the first time she had initiated contact. William bent slightly, resting his hand on the back of her head in a gesture that felt natural, not forced. Nami watched, her eyes softening with something William hadn't seen in her before: peace. Not the fragile kind born from relief, but the deeper kind that came when fear finally loosened its grip. "We don't want to run anymore," she said. "You won't," William replied. She closed the distance between them, touching her hand lightly to his arm. "If we stay, we build a new life." "Here," he said, "with me, if that's what you choose." Nami looked at Asha, who nodded instantly, as if the decision had been waiting inside her all along. Nami returned her gaze to William and whispered, "We choose to stay." The fire glowed warmly across their faces as the danger faded into memory. William felt the cabin settle in a way it never had before, not with silence, but with belonging. Nami sat beside the stove. Asha curled against William's leg, finally letting go of the necklace without fear of losing it again. William knelt beside her, placing the repaired string gently into her hands. "You're safe now," he said. And for the first time since she arrived, Asha believed it. The cabin, once a place for one man's loneliness, now held a family forged not by blood but by choice, steady, resilient, and unbreakable. Their story, filled with hardship and fear, reached a quiet ending that offered something none of them thought they'd ever find: a home, a future, and peace that would last.